many times have you run New York?
I think 6, not counting the weird COVID fake one that we did together, before work one morning.
That was definitely an experience.
It was cold and wet.
It was definitely very cold and rainy and windy. And I think my hands were numb at the end of that. That was the virtual year.
Yes.
I had a streak going for quite a few years there.
I did too.
Between racing and crewing, pacing. It was a lot of fun. And then I think New York just got insanely hard to get into because of New York roadrunners being difficult to sign up for races. And so I think I took a multi-year hiatus, even though I actually really wanted to get back to racing it.
Which you will next year.
Which I will next year. I actually totally thought I was going to be able to this year, but that ended up not being the case. So welcome to episode 8 of Legwork. We're almost at 10. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
You can believe it?
I can believe it. It's our first cube number, 2 to the 3rd.
Yes. And we are very excited today to talk about New York City Marathon course strategy. We have done this set of slides quite a few times over the last few years, but this is the first time we're doing it recorded. And so for those listening, we are going to be sharing a screen for parts of this to talk about various elements of the course to help you see the course, not just hear us talk about it. So this will certainly be fine as an audio only, but I think it'll be enhanced if you are watching this either on Spotify or YouTube.
Certainly for when we start talking about elevation profiles.
Absolutely.
I would tune in for the visuals.
Yes. Why don't we talk about our favorite New York?
The one we did together. I'm going to say you were assuming that was my favorite New York.
I don't think it was. I mean, maybe it was.
I think actually my favorite New York was my first BQ.
And what year was that?
That was 2016, which qualified me for 2018.
What was that training cycle like?
That was the first one that I truly just wrote my own plan rather than following something or modifying something that was pre-baked. So it was kind of me trying my first solo attempt at coaching myself. It was a good training cycle. I was happy. I think that was the first time I probably hit 60 miles a week at the peak and got my BQ. I think it was I negative split that race, which as we will talk about is I still think the best way to run New York, but not the easiest course to negative split.
Correct. I am aware that it is an important element of race strategy, and I will certainly preach it. I'm not sure how well I follow it.
Have you ever negative split a marathon?
That's a good question. I'd have to take a look. I am going to bet that I have. My guess is actually that my second marathon, which was New York, was a negative split.
Because you learned your lesson.
Because I learned my lesson. So I think to answer my own question, my favorite, actually, I don't know. Certainly among my most memorable is my first, which is not because it was my first. It was because I so spectacularly blew up. In fact, one of the slides later in the presentation will be to show visually how much that happened. But I went out very fast. I was a 122, maybe a 119 half marathon runner at the time. And I came in at the half.
You thought it was running 2 halves? Was that your plan?
Kind of. I don't think I had enough thought. That's not a knock on the group training plan coach that I had at the time. I just, I think like many, and we'll talk about this, went into the race thinking, oh, I'm feeling really good. I can totally sustain this for a marathon. And that's obviously not a good strategy, particularly if you're not accustomed to starting a marathon fully tapered, well-trained. I actually think I was well-trained.
Yeah.
I very much could have done better if I had entered with a more thoughtful strategy. It is born out of that I think this slide deck and our desire to share what it is that we've learned and where that comes from. Because I was coming through at around, I want to say it was a 122 first half.
Oof.
Which was blazing.
Yeah, you were optimistic.
I was very optimistic. And the second half, I think, was somewhere around 155. So very much a positive split. and painful and hurting. And I'd put in a lot of effort. And ultimately, I learned a number of very valuable lessons. And even though I had done a lot of running, and I had at that point run for many years and had done tons of halves and had raced in high school, which in a parallel way, my very first race ever in high school, I did the same
Similar
thing.
strategy.
Very similar strategy. Actually, no, it was even worse. It would be, I was in first in my first invitational cross country in high school. Did I ever tell you this story? I don't know if I have.
I think you have.
Okay. But I went out so fast that I was first on this, like, I was a freshman. Okay. And it was a 5K cross country, so it's like, mostly kind of like grass trail type of terrain. And I'm pretty sure there's this photo of like, this sort of distant, like starting line, like it was where the spectators were. It was like the starting line was across the way. And then like the runners kind of came in almost like a cone through to where the trail was. And I was like the tip of the spear of this like cone. And I swear I was in the lead for maybe, a quarter mile. And because I thought I was such hot shit. Maybe that's wrong to say. I had a lot of confidence, which I think is useful in some ways when you're running. But I think when you need to learn a lesson of pacing and tactics and understanding where you are, it's quite another thing. So I think when I say that that's my favorite, I think that's why I say it, because that particular New York City Marathon year, I ran a 3:15, and I came back the next year where I do think I negative split. And that was I want to say 2:57 or something like that. So I was really proud of like being able to come back next year, was incredibly disciplined, did not let myself get over my skis, and had a really nice time. So today what we're going to cover is effectively 3 parts. The first is going to be the starting line, getting to the course, logistics. The second part is going to be about the course itself, different parts of the course, how it's structured, how to approach it and understand it, the elevation profiles, etc. We're then going to move on to some things surrounding the race. That's going to be nutrition, the taper, and stuff like that. So let's get into it. So Molly, kick us off with getting to the start.
I think the first thing to understand about New York is it's going to be a long day. And just getting to the start is a multi-hour process. Just embrace it. That's part of the experience. Is it ideal? Maybe not, but I think
of all the majors,
it is probably the most logistically intensive. Even Boston, where you're driven to the start, there's one mode of transportation involved.
Yep.
Unlike New York, where it's
planes, trains, and automobiles.
Basically. I think, when we coach athletes, we usually advise them to kind of just use the time to the best of their ability. So if you go about it the right way, I think you can sort of approach the transportation time as actually kind of time to relax and focus and kind of get yourself into race mode without feeling rushed, which can be nice because you're building in like a 2-hour process between probably when you leave your hotel or your apartment to the time that you're actually on Staten Island and starting to do the imminently race preparatory steps. This is definitely like a 2 breakfast day situation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think for most people, especially for
if you're an early wave,
you're getting up at probably like 4 or 5 o'clock.
5, yeah.
And that's even if you have everything kind of prepared.
Yeah. So one thing I like to remind people is even if you've carb loaded for the days leading up to the race, your liver glycogen overnight will drop. What's in your legs will not. But you do kind of need to top it off in the morning if you want to be truly maximizing your carb loads. So have breakfast. I like to have my more substantial breakfast thing early when I'm leaving the house or, before you are kind of on your journey. So whether that's a bagel and peanut butter or, whatever the most solid thing you're going to eat, I think do it then. And then make sure that you have snacks for the ensuing couple of hours, because you're going to not be starting the race for a few hours. And then for almost everybody, you're going to be running until or through lunchtime.
Yeah. And I think obviously the simpler those snacks are, the better. I've seen people bring a range of things, and whatever you would normally do on a long run is certainly what we would
But
suggest.
I think try to mimic the same timing as a long run.
Yeah.
Also. So eating breakfast at 5 a.m. and then not hitting the start line until 10 is probably not how you start your long run.
Right. One of the things that always freaks people out is that the clocks change. And anybody with a modern phone, this will happen automatically. You are at least falling back.
You get an extra hour
and so you
of
do
sleep.
get an extra hour of sleep, which is kind of nice. But it is something that everybody kind of freaks out about. I would just have a couple of different clocks.
When you wake up in the morning and go to the kitchen, like your microwave will probably be wrong, and don't freak out. It's okay.
Right. Yeah. I think it's just one less thing to make sure is not stressing you out.
Yeah.
But, anything any modern device is, that's connected to the internet is going to automatically, or should automatically do that switch for you.
Because there is such a long lead up to the start, it's really important that you kind of have your checklist in hand. And I would say this is something that you should be doing race week, and not wait until Saturday evening to try to figure it out. So obviously you need your gear, your race number, your poncho bracelet if you're doing that, as opposed to bag check, all of those kind of regular race things. But I always like to pack my pre-race snacks and kind of have my hydration figured out and ready to go. That all needs to go in the bag that they give you at the expo. And also consider things like, do you need snacks for the ferry? Any kind of personal care products that you might want to bring with you. And then obviously your race nutrition and hydration as well. And also it's a long wait on Staten Island, or certainly for the later waves, it could be a long time to sit there. So things like bringing a Mylar sheet, because there's, you're basically going to be sitting on the ground in all likelihood. You may want extra layers of clothing that you're going to toss. Cell phones generally don't work on Staten Island just because of the sheer volume of people. So maybe bring a magazine or something else if you're somebody that kind of needs to distract yourself in the hours that you're just going to be sitting there. Then have something that's analog.
Yeah, especially I think one of the challenges about starting Village is that it's a bit of a maze. And there are those signs, that have 15 different directions. And I feel like they all kind of eventually will point back to itself. So if you're trying to meet somebody, I think having a bit of a plan in advance to make sure that you know what that plan is.
Maybe bring the actual printed map of the start area.
Right.
For reference. Things I just don't count on having your phone necessarily.
Yeah. So transportation to the starting line, there are generally speaking 2 ways to get there. The third way is that sometimes people stay with somebody
who lives on Staten
Island, assuming you're not one of those people, because most people are not. You are either taking the ferry or a bus. So let's first talk about the ferry. This is something where you have to select the ferry time that you are intending to go on. That is not a hard selection, but it is certainly a way for NYRR and the ferry system to kind of understand and manage the significant volume of people going through the terminal at those hours. So while it's not the end of the world if you miss that ferry, and you shouldn't stress about that, it's certainly something you should approach with intention and try and, go at the time that you said you were going to go. When you get to Staten Island Ferry, and for most people, that's either going to be by taxi. We've taken taxi to get to Staten Island Ferry Terminal on the Manhattan side. Obviously, there's subways. There's a number of different ways to get there. Once you get to the Staten Island Ferry Terminal, you then obviously will need to wait until the next ferry that will take you across. It's a little bit of a subdued party.
Yeah.
Because people are excited, but it's also super early in the morning for many people, or they're just kind of getting up. And so, there's an excitement in the air, but I think there's also a sort of anxiousness because you're still a little bit a ways away from starting village. And so you get a mix of vibes, I think, in the ferry terminal on the Manhattan side.
Yeah, my move was always to, as soon as I got there, just get into the bathroom line.
Yeah.
That is the last indoor plumbing of the day. I think I've always been wave 1 or 2 maybe, but I've always found Staten Island Ferry Terminal to be like actually a very, very smooth process. And like the bathrooms are well staffed and kept clean. And there's a ton of NYRR volunteers to help you figure out where you need to go. And in general, I think that part of the process, while it, I think feels a little overwhelming, certainly the first time you do it, like trust the process, like they have figured it out and it works.
There is, to my knowledge as well, at least one sort of little shop there too. And I've definitely gotten Gatorade. Yeah,
you can buy water. I
Yeah.
think there's a Dunkin' Donuts that's open typically.
I wouldn't bank on it, but I think it's nice to know that like that might also be an option for like sort of last minute Gatorade. I would also say to be careful about having too much water or fluid at this time. A, because like you're going to pee soon, but I think B, just in terms of making sure you're not flushing yourself clean as salt and sodium, like make sure if you are drinking and staying hydrated, just make sure that that's some sort of mix of something that has electrolytes, that you're not starting like completely sort of diluted.
So once you're on the ferry, it's actually a really lovely trip usually. So try to if you can get a seat near a window. I wouldn't, unless it's a really nice day. I usually don't take the deck outside, but it's very pretty. You can see the Statue of Liberty. It's kind of the most, in many ways, serene, I think, period of the day. So kind of enjoy it, I think. I think there are bathrooms on the ferry.
There are, for sure.
But then the next thing to know is you're going to get off the ferry on Staten Island and you still have quite a ways. The ferry terminal on Staten Island is not near the start.
No, not in any way.
So what happens then is you come out of the ferry terminal and there's like a long line that will immediately form. And you just kind of get in that line. If you are running with friends or planning to hang out with friends on Staten Island, try to get in that bus line together, because they basically then just take like 30 people at a time or whatever fills a bus, and school buses pull up
and they direct you where to go.
They direct you onto a bus, and then you're just going to be on that bus for
like 40 minutes
to an hour. It's going to be stop and go. Again, just relax into the process. It feels by that point, because you've kind of now taken a car or a subway to a boat and now you're on a bus and you're still not at the start line. I think everybody's anxiety is kind of increasing as this process goes along. You stressing out will not clear the traffic ahead of you. Nope. It's basically a solid line of buses from the ferry terminal to the starting line. So you're going to get there when you get there. Just relax.
Yeah. Agreed. So that takes us to the other form of transportation, which are the buses. Most of the buses, and there are official buses and then unofficial buses. And I say unofficial, I mean ones that like some clubs run. And so they are official in the sense that like they have permission to go, but they're not official in the sense that like they're not open to
public.
The general running public who are running this. And so charity buses will often have their own buses. You'll then have the NYRR buses, but know where your pickup is and don't assume that they're all in the same spot. So just be aware and conscious of when that bus is leaving and plan accordingly. There is a good MTA site for identifying when there are closures or whatever of a subway line. And so if you don't check that in advance and you're expecting to be able to take a subway to where your bus is supposed to meet, and that subway is now closed and it's running express through that stop, then that's not something you want to find out that morning. So just there are ways of identifying when there are closures, particularly for those of you who are not from here. This is not something that you're used to dealing with. The system, I think, is commonly understood to be a 24-hour system. That does not mean that there are not regular closures, especially on the weekend. I don't think they really give special. It's not like they make the MTA subway system like a Monday morning rush hour. Yeah. Right. It's a weekend schedule.
Yeah.
So making sure that you don't miss your departure time. It is generally a long ride, and that is also stop and go traffic. You know, the BQE up through Verrazzano is just full of buses. And, you know, I think the one comfort that you have with the bus system is that, like, you know, you'll get there because that's their job. They have point to point, one place to go, and they will let the bus go through before they close the bridge for traffic, and then obviously clear it for us to run the opposite direction. These buses often don't have bathrooms. So contrary to the ferry option, where you have at least 2 bathroom options, both in the ferry terminal itself and on the ferry, here I wouldn't bank on having a bathroom, but I would try and do your business before you get to the bus and understand that that might be potentially an uncomfortable ride, particularly if you are drinking a lot of fluids.
Yeah.
All right. So you've gotten to the starting village. Starting village is not a easy place to navigate. There are a number of directions and ways to turn that are not intuitive when you get to Athletes Village. So as we stated earlier, your cell phone is not going to work here. I don't think there has been a single year where I have had reliable cell service being in Athletes Village. There's also a pretty heavy police presence, almost military presence over the last several years.
Yeah.
And so I think if that's not something you're used to, just be aware of that.
Security has, at least in my experience, and I have not run it in the last couple of years, but that's always been pretty smooth. They generally have that very well staffed.
Yeah.
So unlike some other Roadrunners races where security is the bottleneck, I would say that, at least in my experience, typically hasn't been
Agreed.
a problem for the marathon.
Yeah, it's just, I think, jarring if you're kind of coming through a bus and then all of a sudden you've got like some pretty heavily armored vehicles right at the start.
So the main organizational strategy for Athletes Village is your bib color. So you will either be blue, orange, or pink, and those each have their own start areas. You can actually swap colors typically. So if you're an orange person and your friend is a blue person, you can start together, provided you start in whatever the slower start corral is. They generally don't mind if you switch colors, but you do have to respect whatever your start wave is, obviously, and then your corral within that wave. So for those who have run it before, I think it was last year, they first changed the bag drop process. So even if you're somebody that has done the race, but maybe didn't do it last year, just be aware that it's now changed. You do not drop a bag on Staten Island. So you will not be bringing that bag to the start with you. You will only have whatever your designated bag for the start is, which the assumption is you are then either carrying with you or tossing. So the way the bag drop works now is you drop off at Central Park West between 69th and 70th Street. You can do that on Friday, the 31st, or Saturday, November 1st from 9 to 5. And then you retrieve it from the same spot. So basically, they used to allow you to drop a bag on Staten Island, and then they drove those bags to the finish line. There's no longer bags being transported. They basically get dropped off, and that's where you collect it at the end.
It's a security thing too.
Yeah,
it means that there's
sense.
less. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But I think it does mean, like, sometimes I would put stuff that, like, not that I was worried about it expiring or something, but, you know, I think knowing that knowledge might change what it is that you're putting in there. I think for some people, and I definitely used to do this, if I brought my phone. I think
that's the biggest change.
Yeah, I would put my phone. I would want to bring my phone through to Athletes Village, but I would put the phone in the bag that then was transported. Now you either have to bring your phone or not bring your phone, starting at the beginning of this whole process, right?
The day before, essentially.
Which most people are not going to do.
Right.
So that means that either you're carrying your phone or you're giving it to a loved one or whatever, but it's not through the bag drop process anymore. And I think that's probably the biggest practical impact for most.
Yeah.
I suspect most people probably don't mind, but certainly if you're coming in from out of town and you're only arriving on Saturday, that might be something that like maybe that's the first thing you got to make sure you take care of after you get your bib. I suspect that it's an official finish line bag that you need to get when you pick up your bib. So that's just something that needs to be a little bit more carefully orchestrated. If you're coming in from, especially if you're coming in from out of town, you're not local. It's not easy to do the Friday. And certainly from a communications phone perspective, then more people are probably running with their phone then. All right. So starting times to get ourselves out of starting village. There are a number of waves and corrals. For anybody who has run a New York Roadrunners race, they're generally, I think, getting more and more strict with who is allowed in and making sure that you're keeping to your correct corral. So if you are somebody who's in wave 2 trying to squeeze into wave 1, that's not going to happen. Yeah. If you are in a slower corral by pace, D or E, say, and then you're trying to get into A, that is not going to happen. So just kind of manage your expectations on whether you think that's possible to just kind of slip in. There's a ton of volunteers. They check for your bib multiple times. If you're wearing a layer, you will be asked to lift up your sweater, or I said sweater. You will be asked to lift up your sweater or whatever your outer layer is in order to show your bib as proof that you belong in that wave and corral. You can, as Molly, you said earlier, drop back to a slower corral or a later wave, but you definitely cannot move up. Keep in mind when your corrals open and close. When the corrals are closed, they're closed. And if you miss the time, then you miss the time. I would say that I have generally been in wave 1, and I think that has been, for me, the most stressful when it comes to the bus. And I'm worried about the corrals closing. That is the only point where I am a little bit more anxious. I think, as you said earlier, it kind of is what it is. Yeah. And if this is something that really matters to you, then you got to go earlier and make sure that you allow enough time.
And there are porta potties in the corral. So once your corral opens and you're allowed to step into it, don't feel like you need to rush to the bathroom before the corral opens necessarily, because you have, especially if you get into the corral as soon as it opens or shortly thereafter, you actually do have a decent amount of time. It's like 35 minutes typically that you're in there. So you're going to have plenty of time to go to the bathroom once you're in the corral.
Right. Is this the earliest start? 9:10? I don't remember it starting this earlier. Year. Okay. I know in years past, wave 1 was like 9:40. So I'm learning something new. So part 2, the course itself. This is the full course elevation profile. What this should hopefully tell you is that this is obviously not flat. Hopefully that is not news to you. I would say that you've got 4 distinct parts of work with lots of little hills in between. We're going to go through each of this section by section, but at a very high level, your first 2 miles is the Verrazano. It's going up and it's coming down. And as you can see, it's also your biggest hill, not simply in terms of literal elevation and height. It is a beautiful view, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's also, from a gain perspective, it's your most significant. The second big area of work will be when you get to about mile 8-9, that is Lafayette, and you would have done a number of miles. I know this looks like it's up and down between 2 and 5, and you actually have a nice little down part here. This is relatively flat. You can kind of see that it's oscillating between about 40 feet and 70 feet. So it's pretty unremarkable
over
in terms
a course of 5 miles.
Right.
So it's pretty imperceptible.
Yeah, agreed. So the next time you really experience something will be Lafayette, and that's this part at around mile 8. The third would be the Queensboro. That's between 15 and 17, and that's what you see here. That's certainly one that a lot of people talk about as being one of the hardest hills, certainly because it's at the 15, 16 mile marker. Our personal view is, and I think shared by many, is that the hardest is really the last one that you see here, which is around mile 23, and that is the 5th Avenue hill. It's an entire mile, and that is heading south on 5th Avenue before you enter the park. So we'll get into each section, but at a high level, you have those 4 major areas of work, and they're pretty scattered throughout the course.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that when you look at the overall profile, from about mile 14 on, you can see that there's, even if you took out the Queensboro and Fifth Ave, the general trend is all uphill for the second half. There is very much a net gain from the midpoint to the end.
Yeah. So the first segment, this is the Verrazano. A lot of people hit this pretty hard. We advise our athletes to
please not do that.
Please not do that, and to really take this easy. Whatever your marathon pace is, I would add probably 20 to 30 seconds per mile pace wise. So if you're running 7s or 8s, I would then run a 8:15 to 8:30 or a 7:15 to 7:30 on the up, if not even closer to like even a full minute per mile.
Yeah.
This is their first mile. So this is not the time to like
do not bank time
and just let this hill kind of be its thing.
It is the biggest incline in the race. So you're going to feel great. You're going to be excited. Yeah. You're all tapered.
Right. Yeah.
Like don't.
So 30 seconds worth of time or 45 seconds worth of time, in order to get to that top crest, because it's about 0.75 to a mile. Yeah, I mean, that's not a lot of time to make up over the course of the rest of the marathon.
Yeah, the one thing that I would add about the Verrazano is the road deck, as I recall, is a metal grate. They sometimes put down carpets, right?
I think that's true.
Those can be slippery if it's been raining.
Mm-hmm.
It's also it's not a particularly comfortable thing to run on. And it does not matter what wave you are in, unless maybe you're in like the AA corral at the very front of the open field. But it doesn't matter how fast you are. Someone in front of you will stop and take a selfie.
Yeah.
So just be prepared. This is not a place to waste energy bobbing and weaving and trying to maintain whatever your decided pace is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This really is a warm up.
Yeah.
All right. So you've come down. Actually, I should say when you're on the way down, I think similarly, don't pound this downhill. Yeah. I think it's tempting to say, okay, well, I just went a minute per mile slower. Why can't I go 30 seconds a mile faster? I think, again, you're still on mile 2 of a marathon and you've got a lot of work ahead of you, right? If you're going to negative split the race, that means that you are not banking time. It means that you are being smart and conservative. I know I'm personally an N of 1, but I think that it is borne out that every world record, but just I think conventionally understood great performances are negative splits. And that means that you are racing the second half faster than the first half. So your first 2 miles is not where you turn on the engines. This is where you're acting a lot more conservative. You're going to see, people are going to be blazing past you. You're going to see them later, especially if you're conservative now. So I cannot stress enough, do not let both the up and the down dictate what it is that you're going to do.
Yeah.
And enjoy, I think actually use it. If you distract yourself with, this is a nice view, obviously to your point, make sure you're not tripping on some weird grate. Obviously this is not a pedestrian way normally.
Yeah.
And therefore it was not built to fully contemplate a runner. And so there might be some parts in the bridge where there's like an inch, gap between, 2 slabs or something. So I think just be conscious of that, but enjoy the view.
Yep. I think the last thing on the Verrazzano is just because of the way the start process works, this is a really tough race to do any sort of warm up directly before. That's just, you're going to be standing in a corral or you're going to be waiting on the bridge once your corral is released. So just treat the first 2 miles as the warm up. Yeah.
Like I said, you said you've done this 5 times or 6 times. I've done it 5 times. The only time I had a terrible race was when I really blew through these first 2 miles. Every other race, it has been I'm going to be a cool customer on this and not this is not anything to write home about from a pace perspective. It should be, frankly, 2 of your slowest miles. Okay, so you get off the bridge, and this is where you're going to still be separated in terms of the 3 colors. They don't converge until you get to about mile 3 or about the 5K. And so eventually you'll see a convergence at the end of this section, but it's the off ramp. And then you start entering this flat period. The next several miles, both at the end of this section and at the subsequent section, they're pretty flat. You can see that in the elevation profile, that it's a pretty flat, somewhat unremarkable from an elevation perspective segment of the course. This is where you're also going to get your first aid station. There's obviously no aid stations on the bridge. Hopefully that's not something that you're looking for in the first 3 miles, but there's no aid station, there's no porta potties, there's no nothing on the bridge itself. So mile 3 is the first time that you're going to have any of that type of support.
So 4th Ave in Brooklyn, I would say, is the point where hopefully you're kind of settled in after the first 5K. And this is where you just kind of lock in my mind. It's again, a pretty flat string of miles. It's
very easy running.
It's very
tremendously easy running. You can see that there's a number of downhills here.
Yeah. And hopefully, you're still feeling really relaxed at this point in the race. So again, this is just kind of settle in whatever your goal pace was for the, front end of the marathon. This is kind of where you can find that, because there's not a lot of up and down. There's no turns really through this section. So it's, you can kind of find your lane and just go.
I think this is also a really great part of crowd support. I think it's unexpected because it's so early in the race, but 4th Ave has such a fun vibe.
Yeah.
Even quite early, there's bands playing, there's kids out, there's families.
Yeah. It's very neighborhood.
Yeah. You're going through a lot of neighborhoods. These are not traditionally, quote, touristy areas. And so you get a lot of locals out just cheering and supporting.
There's somebody that always has tissues, I recall.
Okay.
I don't know. It just seems like a nice thing.
Yeah. People are offering stuff.
People are just trying to be nice.
There's lots of kids. High five some kids. It's like I said, this is this is your easiest part of the course. It's as we've been saying, and not to sound like a broken record, but it's flat. There are some usable downhills, and it's early on. So you're going to be feeling great. You're going to have these bands playing music, and it's just a lot of fun. So I think it almost helps get you in the mood for the race. And it's probably when you're going to be feeling your best. But that brings us to Lafayette. That is the next section. So you do have a decent, once you turn onto Lafayette Ave, and you'll know, right? Yeah. You'll know when 4th Ave ends, because you will distinctly turn onto something. There's going to be a very busy part of Lafayette, and that's the Brooklyn Atlantic Terminal, the Barclays Center, and you turn onto Lafayette Avenue, and you do start to have a bit of a uphill. Yeah.
And as an aside, I would say, if you are trying to see people, if you have a cheer squad that's out supporting you, I think that is a spot, particularly Atlantic Terminal, where it's a transportation hub. There's a ton of subways that go there. So people, especially I think out of towners, look at that and think it's a great spot to cheer because it's going to be easy to get there. As a runner, there is no possible way you're going to spot anybody.
You're not going to, it's way too crowded. So if you are expecting to see anybody,
it's loud. There's like a main stage, I think, or some kind of like big sound system situation. It's kind of overwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, we tried seeing you in 2024.
Yeah.
Was that last year? Yeah, it was last year. Or no, 2023.
Yeah. 2 years ago.
And there was 10 of us, I think, all looking for you.
Yeah. And I was looking for you.
You knew where we were. There was a specific street where we told you we would be, and we still didn't see you, and you still didn't see us.
Yeah.
And that just goes to show you that, like, even with careful planning, with 2 people who have done it a number of times with a bunch of people, you would think that it would be potentially fine. And it really is difficult to see somebody through Lafayette. It also kind of feels like a little bit of a shoot.
I was going to say, this is the point where the course narrows.
The course narrows
a
bit.
Time.
Yeah, it narrows a bit. I mean, 4th Ave. That's the other thing too. 4th Ave is so wide, And I remember one of the good things, especially early on, is that like there's sometimes there'll be like, the porta potty sections will be like 5 or 6 porta potties. And so if you're like early on, if you need to go to the bathroom, it's usually not a problem. Everything's wide and spread out. You've got the entirety of 4th Ave. So you basically have like effectively like 4 or 5 lanes between the dividing part of the northbound and southbound direction. But once you get to Lafayette, it all converges into what is a one-way,
like a city street.
Yeah.
Essentially.
So it definitely is loud. And I think the other risk through this section as well is starting to pick up on this hill because you have this amazing crowd support. So that's the amazing thing about it, is that you have a lot of people cheering really quite loudly on Lafayette, but you are still only at mile 9.
Yeah. And the hill is, you will feel the hill
for sure.
And I think it's also a moment. It's probably the first thing that, if you've been pacing properly, this is probably the first point where you're going to be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, this is a hill.
One instantly sort of jumps to like, it's only mile 8.
Right.
I shouldn't feel tired.
Right.
And it is important to remember, this is the first hill in a while. You are going to notice it, and you're a third in at this point. So it's not crazy that you're starting to feel it.
Right.
But it is a good check-in point where if it's like, I think, is okay. But if it's like,
yeah,
back it off.
Yeah.
Like, it's still early enough you can save it, but
yeah,
Lafayette should not be hurting for sure.
Yeah. I would say this section is also quite nice in terms of coverage from the sun. So Lafayette is relatively well covered from trees.
Tree lined, yeah.
You've got some sections through like McCarran, for example. When you get into parts of Williamsburg, it's a little bit more open, but certainly once you get to Queens,
buildings on either side there. Yeah. So at least earlier in the day, you get some good shade.
Yeah.
Just by the fact that the streets aren't that wide.
Yeah. But once you get to Queens, you're pretty exposed for most of the rest of the way. So you're going to get some nice coverage. 4th Avenue is also totally exposed. I mean, even like in the morning, like there's not a lot of like tall buildings around.
And given
4th
how
Ave.
wide the street is.
And given how wide it is, you're not really getting a lot of coverage. It's earlier, so you shouldn't have the sun beating down on you like you might do if you were in a later wave, later in the race. But it's certainly, once you're in the Lafayette through the half, there's a little bit more coverage, which is nice. I would say, I used to say that actually crowd support here could wane in some parts of Williamsburg, but I think that, last time I did it, I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised at like how there was still, even through Williamsburg, parts that were...
It definitely drops off, but...
A little bit,
I think, as somebody that doesn't, like, I find majors a little overwhelming, and just the amount of constant cheering. Like, I kind of enjoy quieter races. I actually appreciate that there's a little bit of a break in that, because I think it's a helpful time also in the race to kind of be able to like regroup and focus again, and not just have like a million sensory things happening.
Yeah. So this takes us through the Pulaski. The Pulaski is a bridge. It's not remarkable in terms of its
drawbridge. That's kind of fun.
Yeah, I was saying, no disrespect to Pulaski as an aesthetic or historical landmark, but we commonly think of bridges as like, every other bridge, almost every other bridge in the course.
Elevation wise. It's a pretty friendly bridge to remember.
It's a friendly bridge. I shouldn't say almost every other. There are a couple of other bridges here like Willis and, that are flat. But
that is the halfway point. There are no, this is true, I think, of all the bridges in the race. There's no crowd support on the bridges. There is at the halfway point, like an official NYRR course announcer. So I remember one year when I was running 2017, I want to say, I heard... It was actually, that's one of my favorite like New York memories, was I happened to be on the Pulaski when Shalane Flanagan was about to win. And so they were, I think, like basically just like reading Twitter on the loudspeaker to like tell people what was going on. But it was super cool. And all the Americans like cheered, and you could tell like who was American around you.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of a fun moment.
Yeah. Okay. So next section is Queens, which is quite short. It's only about a mile and a half to 2 miles. There's a couple of turns here. Really, these turns are all to get you onto the Queensboro Bridge. I don't know who wins the like shortest time in a borough, if it's Bronx or
That's
Queens.
a good question.
I'd have to,
that would be good trivia.
Yeah. Okay. So let's remember that this is about about 2 miles here in Queens. So once you get to the Queensboro is, about a mile and a half from start to finish. It's a decent uphill climb. And I think this is where Molly, you and I always say to our athletes, like, you should hopefully be still feeling pretty good through the Queensboro. If you get to the Queensboro and you're not feeling good, it's going to be a little bit of a
long 10 miles.
A long 10 miles to the finish, because as you said earlier, it's a net uphill. So your first primary goal should be to get to this point feeling pretty decent, because you've got, as we've said, a good deal of work ahead of you between First Ave, Fifth Avenue mile hill on the way back, and getting through Central Park. So if you are local, would highly recommend running the pedestrian side of the Queensboro Bridge and getting some practice in. I know that the last 10 as a thing this year, there's been a bit of a clampdown. I am sure there will still be people who do that. We are sad because we have done a last 10 event for, I don't even remember when we haven't done a last 10 event. It's probably been at least 5 years that we've done a last 10 event through Bakline. And I think out of respect to also trying to encourage some order to the chaos that has been the last 10, we did our last 20 event. So for those of you listening who missed our last 20, where we had a 3 aid station support event starting from Bakline HQ through to the finish line, but would definitely recommend doing the bridge once or twice and training over the next couple weeks and understanding, what that feels like. I will say, and I think you and I both share this, that it's hard for a number of reasons, because it's the longest stretch where, aside from the Verrazzano, and the Verrazzano is a little bit different because you're pretty much going to be with a ton of other people and you're super excited and you've just started and you're feeling amazing because it's mile 1. Yeah. Here you're at mile 16 and generally people are a little bit more spread out. If you were chatting with a friend in the beginning, you're probably not chatting now anymore. And this is a lot of heavy breathing, and there's like, at least in the Verrazano, in the upper deck, there's no top. And so when you're on the Queensboro, all of that sound is kind of reverberating back to you. And so it just sounds like everyone is working really, really hard.
You just hear footsteps and heavy breathing.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's quite an experience, I would say. But a lot of people talk about this as being among the hardest. Again, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying that when we get to the Fifth Avenue Hill, that's the one that we think is a lot harder. Our advice, though, is like, try to get to this point feeling good.
Yeah. And I think a thing to note about the Queensboro, even if you're local, I'm surprised by it anew every time I run this race, is it just feels so different on the road bed of the bridge than it does when you're running the pedestrian path, because it's hard. You don't have great visibility.
Yeah.
Out
and you can never really
bridge.
See the peak.
And it also looks like you're cresting or you're about to crest
for a long time.
Like half of the uphill.
Yeah.
So, and your watch won't work either.
Yeah. And it's close to a mile. It's close to 0.75 for the whole way up.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's always a moment where I think like, oh, that wasn't so bad. I'm almost at the top. And then I realize you're not almost at the top. And I think it's just a function of the fact that the ceiling is not super high. So it just sort of appears that you can never really see the top until you're actually at the top and looking down. Yeah.
Your perception kind of gets a little bit messed up.
Yeah. And then you'll also see land potential if you're near the side of the bridge where you can actually see out. You'll see land that is not Manhattan, what you see initially, that is Roosevelt Island. Yeah. So you are still very much just over the river at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And because you're not getting, I think there's the aid station right before you get on, and then there's an aid station after you get off. But you still have the entirety of the bridge with virtually no support of any kind, whether that's porta potties, people support. You are completely on your own. And so it's something that you just really have to mentally get through. Now, coming off of the bridge, there is and this is where if you run the pedestrian path that has recently been opened, which is lovely, by the way. I can't wait for you to run it for the first time because it's just opened up a couple months ago or about a month and a half ago. But that part does intersect with where the race actually goes now.
Oh, okay.
And so the off ramp that comes off of the Queensboro, like there's part currently where there's like barricades and obviously there's cars going through, those barricades get removed and then you run off of that and onto the same off ramp. Now, when you come across, there is a decent wall of sound there.
Especially coming off of a quiet bridge.
Yeah. I've heard people kind of contest whether it is better, louder, whatever than like Wellesley. Having run both a number of times, I'm not sure I have a like view on which is necessarily quote unquote better. They're just different. But it is exciting because you have like returned to civilization. And
this is your first step into Manhattan.
Yep. Yeah, you are now officially in Manhattan.
Borough number 3.
Yep.
4.
Yes, the 4th borough.
4th.
But obviously you leave it for the Bronx and then come back, but you're in the 4th borough. So when you kind of come around, it is a little bit of a sharp curve to come off. And depending on if that's busy, if you're in a spot in the race where you've got a lot of people around you, just,
there's
be careful.
Also usually, so that this is also the point where you're going to start to see a lot of people walking.
I agree with that.
Even on the downhill, I think people that have really like hammered their quads in a bad way earlier in the race.
Yeah.
So I only bring it up because that turn, again, is one of those places where it is kind of a tight turn. People in front of you may be doing unpredictable things. So just be careful.
Okay. So once you come off of the ramp and you're now onto First Ave. First Ave, I would say, has amazing crowd support. A lot of people, it's pretty busy, and First Ave is quite wide. And so you're able to spread out a little bit. If it's hot, I think they usually have like some sponge stations on First Ave as well. You also pass through 18, which is where Morton is. I think this is a good opportunity to say that even if you are a Morton user and you're excited about the fact that there is a mile 12 and a mile 18 station, you should not be reliant on these two nutrition stations for your New York City Marathon nutrition. I think it's totally acceptable to rely on the Gatorade Endurance formula for electrolytes and some carbs. But even if you were grabbing 2 at each, like that's just not going to be enough for
and it's too late.
And it's too late. And that's the vast majority for the vast majority of you, that's not going to be enough. Like you need to be thinking of your nutrition strategy well in advance and not really relying on the course. There have been some reports too of the Morton stations running out.
Yeah.
And
particularly in the later waves.
Right. And that is absolutely unfortunate. But I think as just a reality check, it's something that even if you are a Morton user, we would highly and strongly and vehemently encourage you to have your nutrition plan and what you plan on carrying with you and how you plan on carrying it decided before the race and not reliant on these 2 stations. So you'll see that there is a bit of an uphill early on. It then flattens out, which is nice. There is a little bit of a downhill, but there is a First Avenue hill, and it's actually not short. You can see there that it starts a little bit around mile 17. This was all of these images are taken from a course profile, probably my own, I think, of when I ran it once. And so some of these are a little bit off in terms of, it's pretty close, but some of these might be a pinch off in terms of, it might have been like 16.9 instead of, at 17 in terms of where the uphill starts. But certainly directionally, this is correct. I think it's enough of a hill to be cognizant of at mile 17 that if you are going a little bit slower or feeling like, hey, I'm working a little bit harder here, I think it's okay to remember that this is a hill.
Yeah. I think that actually it's not steep and it's really not super perceptible. It's kind of a false flat. So I think that is a spot where if you feel like, goal pace is feeling 5% harder there, just remind yourself you are going uphill.
Yeah. I would say that for spectators, and you and I have done spectating for the last several years now, I think that the northern part of First Ave is a really good spot. It's not as crowded. It's a lot easier to see your runner. And frankly, it's probably when your runner might need to really have somebody to look forward to.
Yeah.
So I think if you are looking for a potentially good spot to cheer or tell your family to, cheer for you, picking a street, you should still pick a street. And determine runners left or runners right. I think it's a little bit easier if it's runners left because then they can usually get over to, say you're at mile 19 or maybe a few streets north of mile 19 or a few streets south. You can then generally have your crew get over to then the other side at Fifth Avenue pretty easily. And they can walk that. And so they can then see you at two different spots. But I think it's a lot easier when you're on the northern side of First Ave to do some of that cheering. I think the 70s and 80s are really, because there's a major subway line that goes through 86th Street. So the 70s and 80s are pretty packed. There's also a lot of bars there. So there's a lot of people that are in a bar and then come out to see their athlete. I've had a lot of my friends do that, and I do manage to see them, and I always love it when I see my friends there. But it's harder. It's nice from a crowd support perspective, but again, to meet somebody specific, it's going to be a little bit harder. So I think somewhere around mile 19 might be a good option for a crew. Okay, so now we hit the Bronx. This is a pretty short spot. I would probably say it looks like, based on this, that the Bronx is definitely shorter than Queens. So Bronx probably takes the loss. But Bronx shows up, just to be clear. We're not saying that that Bronx doesn't show up. Bronx shows up. It is very, very supportive in the Bronx, and there are a lot of crews show up. There's a lot of really great crowd support. So it gets a little bit of the shaft. I do think, if I recall correctly, tell me if I'm wrong here, I'm pretty sure that in the earliest days of the New York City Marathon, when they did the 5 boroughs and sort of wanted it to be a sort of 5 borough thing, I think they did the Willis Avenue Bridge and they just went to the other side and then immediately turned around. So the Bronx now has at least a mile and a half, but it was not always. So at one point, it was just a cursory passing through, and not really properly stepping foot into it. There is a very weird part where you kind of go around this parking lot, and you're almost wondering to yourself, "Have I taken a wrong turn?" Because it really doesn't look like where you would put 50,000
major
marathon runners through. It is weird and a little bit odd. That's why I think actually the last 10, or in our case, the last 20 events are helpful, but it's something to just be aware of, I guess. They're very narrow streets, but it's usually late enough into the course where people are not tremendously packed, but there's a lot of 90-degree turns in a very short amount of time.
Yeah. I do remember maybe the first or second time I ran it, and things are spread out enough usually in the field by that point that there's not a ton of people. And I do remember that turn and then looking around and thinking, did I just follow the runner in front of me? Yeah. Down an alley.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like an alley. Yeah. 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 And there's one street, you have 2 90-degree turns and probably 300 feet. Yeah. It's like as close as you get to a hairpin without being a hairpin turn, I would say. Okay. So you've come back into Manhattan, and you are coming down Fifth Avenue. This is also pretty nice crowd support. I'd say higher up, you have lesser crowd support. When you start getting to, I think, mile 22 is when, people start picking it up. And I think that's honestly because a lot of people who were on the First Ave side and then kind of came over.
Although Harlem brings it.
Oh, for sure.
That is one of my favorite sections of the course.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all of these sections bring it. I would say probably certainly when Marcus Garvey Where that 35 mark is for the 35 kilometer, that whole section and Marcus Garvey Park is hopping. There are a ton of crews out to support. There's a lot of horns. There's a lot of cheering. There's a lot of music. It's a party. So my hope is that, like, with the recent announcements from New York Roadrunners and how they're kind of clamping down, I think, on like some of the supported crews, like, there's this like edict that like brands can't have any brand activations along the course. And even crews are kind of like on notice of being careful about like what their footprint is and not bringing tents and that type of thing. So I really hope that doesn't subdue at least the good parts of the cheering. But in any event, everything around Harlem, it's such an amazing experience. Harlem Run is usually stationed by Marcus Garvey Park.
Yeah. They often have like tiger tails and like that is literally a spot where I think if you need something, like if you need to find somebody that has like Vaseline or you have a cramp, like that is probably your best bet other than a med tent. Yeah. Because they just like, it's runners there that are cheering and they kind of, it's a really well supported spot.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a big club, Harlem Run. And so there's just a ton of just really amazing support and cheering on, especially at this point in the race where for many of us, again, you're in between mile 21, 22, most people are really starting to feel it. And I think having a pick-me-up that gets you through this really mentally challenging part, you still have 4+ miles left. For many, that's at least a half hour, if not more, of running. And it's, you've got still some work to do. You still have the Fifth Avenue Mile. And that brings us to the next one, right? There's the Fifth Avenue Mile race in September, and then there's the Fifth Avenue Hill and the New York City Marathon in November. So this is from about 23 to 24. It's before you enter the park, and it's almost an entire mile long getting up from the northern part of Central Park to getting to Engineers Gate. I've definitely seen a lot of people really struggle on this hill because it's a really decent climb and a very tough part of the race.
Yeah. It feels really long.
Yeah.
I think it partly just because it's exposed. It's one of the few points, at least in that stretch of the course, where you are running along straight away. So you can kind of see how far you have to go. Yeah.
Although similarly, I do think maybe a slight counterpoint to that would be, I think similar to our comment on Queensboro, it just feels long and then it eventually flattens out. Yeah. And so I at least have, my recollection has just been that it does feel unending, in part because it's a mile. And it's certainly one of the longer hills that you have. Now, once we get to Engineers Gate and you get yourself into the park, this is where, interestingly, actually some cheer support, I don't want to say wanes, but
I think that's true, actually.
It definitely lessens because every part until this point has been on a street where there's sidewalks and there's plenty of space for people who are cheering and supporting and whatever to be. When you get into the park, the part for the runners is the entirety of the lane. Right, the entirety of
which is basically like one lane for a vehicle.
Yeah, I mean the part that's immediately there is actually quite wide, but it's not like they only get half of the park loop, right?
Yeah, I think there's not a lot of space for spectators,
especially for people who are in New York and this might be their first time. You're used to, runners are usually on one half, and then cyclists are, in the other half. Here, runners get the entirety of the thing. So it's like the one time of the year where like you don't have to deal with cyclists and they're not, getting angry at you, because even on NYRR races during the year, it's sometimes closed to cyclists, but sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes they kind of like make it like half of the, like there's a lane for people like outside of the cones. Here you get the entirety of it. And so because of that, that means that like there's really not a place for many spectators to go. And so when you're this late into the race, your last couple of miles now, you don't have as much cheer support until you get to Central Park South. So on this part, at least you're going southward, clockwise direction, which means that you're not going up Cat Hill, you're going down Cat Hill. This is a net down, I think. So it's in terms of, the only point to what you said earlier of like everything is largely net up.
Yeah,
this is
like the only kind of relief to that.
Yeah, you get a little bit of relief on the way down for some of this part. I remember pacing you, and this was a part where I think I might have pushed my being a pacer a little much, where I was like, come on, let's go. And I think, obviously in hindsight, I believe you appreciated it.
I do remember you saying that like it might not feel like it, but I was running my fastest miles.
Yeah, I do remember saying that to you. You were running your fastest miles. And I think I was trying to give you comfort that like you had BQ'd.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a matter of whether you were going to BQ. It was just a matter of how much. One of my fondest memories is this mile stretch with you. So once we get out of the park, we get onto Central Park South. Central Park South and that's a bit of a 90-degree turn to get onto Central Park South. This part definitely is uphill, and especially at this part of the race. I know it doesn't look like it, but you can kind of see it goes from 80 to about 120 just from here to the finish. So this is definitely an uphill finish. I would say to anyone who was like, when do I start going? I mean, I would say if like you've totally saved all your energy until now, then like you might have done something wrong. But I think if you were like, when can I not worry about needing to save whatever I have left? I wouldn't turn that on until you get to Central Park South.
I think even that, so you get to Central Park South, you've kind of popped out the bottom of the park, you're in Columbus Circle. There's again kind of a huge bandstand. There's like an announcer there that's going to be yelling, welcome to the finish line. But like you were very much not at the finish line.
Yeah.
So don't think you are literally at the finish line.
Yeah.
I would say it's still a little early to go.
Yeah. And the last, quarter mile plus is uphill. It is very much an uphill. This is absolutely an uphill finish race, especially when you're at that part. I mean, it's loud and I think it's nice and it's great. They do a good job of making sure that the ramp back into the park is not both sharp nor worrying about like I think there are planks because there's a curb there that goes from the street back into the park, but I've never had a problem with that. I don't think anyone has ever had a problem with that section. But I think once you get back into the park, you're like, oh, I'm done. But you definitely you still have like a quarter mile, which for, or a little bit less. For some people, you're still talking about like another couple of minutes of running, right? Uphill. So,
and you also can't see the finish line yet.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, exactly. So that brings us through to the finish. People can watch the live stream and you can give it to your friends and family to watch when you're crossing. And I think it's both nice for you to have, especially if you're running with somebody as you and I were with each other. But I think also for friends and family to see that you've crossed and, you've kind of made it. It's like when you like land and you call your family that like, okay, I've landed safely, after a flight. I think it's kind of that similar form of relief.
Hey everyone, it is Alex here from Bakline. Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of Legwork this week. Today, Matt and Molly broke down how to get to Staten Island on race morning, the ins and outs of timing your breakfast and fueling, what those wave times actually mean for your start time, and some smart New York City Marathon course strategy. But they're just getting started, and in part 2, Matt and Molly dive deep into carb loading, fueling tactics, and a whole lot more to get you ready for the big day. You do not want to miss it.